What's up, grinders? So today we're going to review another video. This is Professor Reveals How to Really Learn a Language Science-Based. Now this particular YouTuber, we've actually reviewed him on this channel before. He did the Pimsleur video. My overall opinion was basically that he provided some good advice. It was kind of true in some ways, but also was more of a sales pitch as opposed to, this is actually the cons and negatives of Pimsleur. But I've been told that this particular video is actually pretty good, this interview. So I'm now quite curious to check it out.
Now, the keyword technique improves learning by about 20 to 25%. And
I've never heard that term before, keyword technique. So this is either like a really new method for me, which makes me very interested, or it's just another name for something I already know.
Probably about 60, 70 studies on that.
Professor Paul Nation is a well-known expert in language learning research, and in this video he shares his best advice on...
Let's go check out this guy, because I've never heard this guy's name before, Paul Nation. Okay, so it turns out that he's a scholar in the field of linguistics and teaching methodology. And he's a professor in applied linguistics, and he basically specializes in, teaching. So, Jesus, look at all this. So this guy definitely knows what he's on about.
Learning languages as efficiently as possible.
There's a lot of misinformed prejudice about this. One of our PhD students did a piece of research which for me was...
Is that person's glasses broken? Like, look at his right glass right there. That looks like it's broken. I know it's stock footage, but that just kind of caught me off guard.
One of the most important pieces of research in vocabulary studies for the last 20 or 30 years. And she found that...
He's keeping the good part to the end.
So one of the most important aspects of my conversation with Paul Nation was talking about the importance and the efficacy of learning with flashcards, or, word cards as he calls them. I didn't use word cards in the beginning.
Okay, word cards or flashcards. I would not say that those two words mean the same thing, because a flashcard either could be like a full sentence or it could be a specific word. So I'm hoping they clarify what they mean here.
But when I started learning Japanese, I realized that my mind was just a leaking bucket of vocabulary. And so
He really loves this term. This is the exact same term he used in the Pimsleur video of it's a leaking bucket of vocabulary.
Started using Anki, the flashcard program.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I get the feeling that there's sort of a sense that, you're learning words or maybe sentences if you do sentence cards, but it feels a little bit artificial. So they're wondering, does this really translate into actual knowledge? And is this actually effective? Can you just get input and get similar results as opposed to boring flashcards?
Okay, that is a really good question, and it's definitely one that I'm gonna want to hear from them. But I'm just gonna provide my personal insights first. So I think with flashcards, you shouldn't be learning specific words on a card by itself without some context. However, there is a caveat to this. So when you're first starting out for language, you definitely want to learn things in context. That way you learn more, and you also understand how the words interact with each other, like the actual grammar of the language. You either study it or you just instinctively pick it up as you go. However, as you progress and you start, getting a full holistic understanding of the language, you can then start learning words by themselves without the context, because then you already know how these things are going to slot into the language. You know how they're going to be modified. And as you also advance, it's like that whole 80-20 rule again, that the more you learn, the less of a part of the language it actually takes up. And then you're going to end up with very large amounts of words that you need to learn. But you don't need to learn all of these in context because they mean very specific small things. And by that stage, your understanding of the grammar is pretty good. You know how to slot these things in. So I'm not completely black and white about this. It's more you got to adjust based on your own personal understanding of where you are within the learning of the language.
There's a lot of misinformed prejudice about this. People believe every word should be learned in context. You shouldn't be learning words out of context and so on. Well, yeah, it's good to meet words in context and so on, and you do that through meaning-focused input. But So
meaning-focused input, that's if you're creating a sentence card, for example, in Anki, then yeah, you're basically learning the word in context. Or if you're using a pure CI input, you're definitely learning the word in context.
120 years of 130 years of research of the effectiveness of deliberately learning words in isolation. And recently, and though recently now is probably about 15 years ago, I guess, one of our PhD students did a piece of research which for me was one of the most important pieces of research in vocabulary studies for the last 20 or 30 years. And she found that when you deliberately learnt words on word cards, these words were both implicitly and explicitly available. Now, explicitly available means if someone says, what does so-and-so mean, then you can actually go to your mind and tell them what it means. Implicitly available means when you read and you've only got a split second to bring up the meaning of that word, does word card learning give you that implicit knowledge which you can access in very real time, in short time indeed? And she found that the deliberate learning using word cards resulted in both implicit and explicit knowledge.
So in summary, learning a word by itself means you'll be able to recall the word because you'll be able to think about what you want and it will come out. And you'll be able to identify the word if it was written down. However, it was never stated there whether you would hear the word and you would also, get the same type of thing. But based on my own personal experience, it works exactly the same. But he didn't state that, so I'm just pointing that out.
And there are now other
although it was implied
studies which have supported that. Now, this goes against one of Steve Krashen's ideas in that things which are learnt deliberately are not available for normal language use.
And I've always disagreed with that statement, and people always try to call me out on this, that you can deliberately just learn, words or phrases without actually having any input of the language beyond, your Anki cards. And I know a lot of people will say, well, then you're getting input. That's basically it. But there's a very common thread within the language learning community that realistically the only way you can learn a language is through mass input. And in one way, it's true. But it's also like saying the only way to learn a language is to learn a language. Use the language and have the language available to you. Yeah, it's like a very generic, almost completely pointless statement. What people generally are getting at with this statement is that you have to watch a ton of content and that's the only way you're really going to learn the language. When it's not really that black and white. You can learn a language and speak a language before you can even understand a language coming in through your ears, because each one of these skills is very different. There's tons of people out there who can perfectly fine speak a language, hear the language, but can't read it. Okay? And then there's people who can perfectly read a language, but can't hear it and can't speak it. Because these are all different skills that we focus on. And to give you guys a good example of this, for a very long time, when I first learned Esperanto, there was very, very little video material on the internet. Now there's a ton, and I've helped contribute to that. But that meant I didn't have much to actually listen to. So I primarily learned by making little audio cards myself and listening to them. And that's how I learned it, literally via lots and lots of flashcards. Now, obviously, as I progressed, I made videos, other people started making videos. I then started, getting more and more external input beyond my own voice type of thing. But it proved to me that you could do this in a vacuum if you really, really wanted to. It would take a very, very long time for most languages, but it is possible. And when I've heard people say, oh no, you just need lots of input and that's the only way to learn a language, I'm like, no, because you can do this without just watching a ton of content. That's basically what I'm getting at. And I know people are going to come back around and say, yes, but your flashcards is input. And then my basic thing is, well, then everything is input. If everything's input, then why do we discuss this?
Her research showed very clearly that things which are studied deliberately, vocabulary which is studied deliberately, is available for normal language use. And so that's a very important research finding, I think. Then it really speeds up learning enormously.
And this is why I always say the best methodology is a mixture of all of them. Watch a lot of content, do some active study. Active study with watching lots of content works hand in hand. It helps out. When you watch a lot of content, yes, you're absorbing it, but you absorb it at a very slow rate because there's so much being thrown at you. Your brain becomes very selective about what it wants to learn. So then what you can do is you can look at that content, take the most common things you actually want to learn from it, put that into a card system or whatever other system you want, and then practice that, and then that will help reinforce those particular things that you have been picking up, and it'll allow your brain to less focus on those words and start focusing on more context around it.
I've reviewed most of the studies about deliberate learning in my book, Learning Vocabulary in Another Language, and the research shows very clearly that things which are studied deliberately are retained in memory. They can be retained for a very long time, and all the prejudice.
And I completely agree with this statement. It's not even language based. Like, this is not even a language thing. This is just a memory thing in general. Because I've used Anki to learn programming concepts. And the funny thing is, these are concepts I've worked with for a long time, and I kind of instinctively knew how they worked and stuff. But then if I had to explain to someone, you know, in detail how they worked, I know I would have a problem, because there was times where I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go for an interview, and I know they're probably going to ask about this. So I'm going to pretend to be the teacher, and I'm going to teach you about this. I've worked with this daily for years. And then when I start explaining it, I realize, actually, there's gaps in my knowledge. Like, I didn't even realize there was gaps in my knowledge. So what can I do? I go study it, and then I actually put that into cards, and I practice that. And then like a few days later, I do this whole, you know, pretend to teach thing again. And I find now that I'm able to clarify these things so much more better, because I've been focused studying on this one thing. While previously, everything I knew about this topic, I had learned via context. So I had large holes in my understanding that I wasn't even aware about until I did the teaching method. And this is why every now and then I'll see someone say, oh, those who can't do it, teach it. It's like the worst saying in the world, because if you can teach a topic, like properly teach it, it means you know it. Like if someone can throw questions at you about that topic and you can answer them on the spot, then you definitely know the topic. And I know I've segued a little bit here, but I feel like this is a relevant thing that's not just to languages, it's to just like learning in general. It's like a meta-learning concept.
Against it, but overall, they're not supported by research.
And so, you know, Paul and I, we really talked a lot about flashcards, and in fact, his arguments were so strong that they pushed me to create what is now the Anki Codex. Some of you guys have heard about this.
Okay, this is going to be a bit of an awkward moment. So we've got our Discord for the Evildea channel, and these were discussed today in the Discord, and apparently at least one of them is riddled with errors. So if you're going to be using these flashcards, just be aware that they've probably got a lot of errors, and the implication from the discussions I was reading was that they were basically probably AI generated. Now, I'm not saying that's true. All I want to say here is if you're going to use this guy's Anki core system, just be prepared that they've probably got a lot of errors in them.
These are my flashcard decks that I created for...
In fact, I'm just going to quickly go back. Those look like AI generated covers. Now, I'm not against AI art per se, but if someone's willing to use AI art, then they're also going to be willing to use AI generations another way. So just be aware. Now, if what I'm saying is completely false, correct me in the comments and I'll pin the comment. If you are the YouTuber and you handcrafted all of these, put it in a comment down below and I'll pin it. Now, obviously I'm not a very big YouTuber, so they probably don't care, but I'm pointing that out anyway.
Flashcard decks that I created for Anki. I'll put a link to this in the description of this video. Now, Paul Nation mentioned something that really surprised me. He introduced a learning technique that a lot of people don't know. It's called the keyword technique. And he said that without this technique, without the ability to use this technique, he would just give up on language learning altogether. And so this
this is the one I'm actually interested in, the keyword technique.
This technique, he said, improves learning by 20 to 25%.
Now, there's a vocab learning technique called the keyword technique, which is a rather strange technique, but it's where you want to learn a word. So, say, let's take Japanese, for example. You want to learn the word hagaki, which is a word for postcard. The way you apply the keyword technique to that is to say, well, hagaki, it begins with the word hag, H-A-G, which is an English word. And now I'll make a visual image in my mind. The visualization that I used was...
I get the feeling this is just mnemonics, which I've spoken about on this channel before. It's the association of, you know, sounds to specific images and like stories in your head, but I'll let him finish his thought.
I've been to Taidaiji Temple in Nara, and there's a picture of a monk, a carving of a monk who'd been fasting for 40 days or something, really haggard and thin, and I think of that picture on the postcard. So I'm combining the hag, which is the phonological link, and the picture of the monk on the postcard, which is the meaning link, and then that makes it stick in my memory. Now,
okay, so this is just a new name for something I'm already aware about. Okay, this method that he's talking about is effective. However, there are some big issues with it. I know I've thoroughly tested this. So the benefits, okay, are yes, you will remember a word a lot easier if you can associate it with both an image and the sound of the word together. That will definitely help you remember it. The downside is people then think, oh, okay, well, if this works so well for one word, it's going to work amazingly well for 10 words. And usually it will go pretty good for 10 words. And then they start stretching it out. They're like, okay, let's see how crazy I can take this. And there is YouTubers who talk about, using this type of technique to memorize hundreds of words a day. Now, theoretically, you can do that. However, the issue is, and I know because I've tested learning 100 words using this method in Chinese, is that basically you're going to start muddling up all your stories and your images, and you're going to start actually associating the wrong words with the wrong things, and it's going to become a complete mess in your head. So if there is this particular word that you're struggling to remember, you've tried everything else, a great technique is to try this out. This will help. However, I feel like there's actually other methods that are better, depending on which language you're learning and what your source language is. So let's say you're learning a European language and you speak a European language. Okay, try an etymological link. That will work probably a lot better in most cases, and it will also help you associate the meaning a lot better. Because, for example, in most languages, they will have, if you go all the way back in history, some type of link between the word that you're learning and the word in the other language, okay? It'll be like, it sounds similar, or maybe some other word that's very close to it will sound similar. A good example of this is like when I need to learn the word, dog in Esperanto. It's hundo, okay? Which sounds like the English hound. Not exactly a dog, but boom, just the fact that it's hound means now I can easily remember that word. And it's not just that one word, very obvious word. Probably the vast majority of words in any European language, you're going to be able to find some type of etymological link back that will help you to remember that word. I know people who've done this a lot. Now, obviously, if you're learning a language that's further away, say Chinese, which I'm also learning, this is not going to work as well. And you might get some more, distance out of using a method like this. However, for a language like Chinese, which has a very, very small, number of sounds, and those sounds are reused for a lot of words, this then also isn't as effective, and it's actually better to use, learning characters and then understanding the individual characters and how they fit together to learn words. This is really a per language thing, and you need to approach it through that lens, basically. It's not like a one size fits all. May work in some instances, may not work in other instances. Also, it may actually be bad because it may associate the wrong sound. Like, for example, Chinese, if you're trying to associate the X sound, which doesn't exist in English, you don't want to associate that to an English word because that sound doesn't exist in English, and the closest sound would be an SH, and Chinese already has that, and you're going to start associating the SH, and it's just not a good idea there. So you really got to just use your common sense, basically.
Now, the keyword technique improves learning by about 20 to 25%, and there's probably about 60, 70 studies on
I've never read any of those studies. If anyone has, I would love to hear about that in the comments section below.
that.
You mean
Now, if I know
specifically
that
on the keyword technique?
Yeah,
Oh, right.
specific.
Okay, wow.
But if I
And just to stress, I actually don't doubt this. I just don't think it's the thing that will solve all your problems.
didn't know that technique, I'd give up learning language now, because that technique allows me, the words that won't stick in my memory, I now have a strategy for making them stick in my memory.
Also, I want to segue a little bit because he said, I can't make the words stick in my brain, basically. And as you can see, he's an older chap. I'm not quite as old, but I am a little bit older. And I've been, learning languages on and off since, I was about 20 type of thing. Yeah, I didn't start really learning my first language until I was 21. But the point here being is that as I get older, it becomes a little bit harder to remember things. So maybe this will be more effective for someone who's older because the other methods become less effective in a way. So it's that's another thing you got to take into account when you're looking at these things.
Memory, and the keyword technique helps me do that.
I also asked Paul a question that I often ask people is, if you had a year to learn a language, then what would you do? What would be the program? And so
Oh, this is the ultimate question. I've been actually asked this one before. Let's say I had a year, I had no responsibilities, and unlimited funds. Okay, well, this is what I do. One, obviously, I'm going to be in country for that language because that will just extend my, immersion time. Two, I would probably spend maybe 80% of the day on input, watching content in the language based on my current level. 3, the remaining time, so that 20%, would be dedicated to creating, flashcards or something similar based on the most common words for whatever like content I'm watching at that time, and then reviewing that. And then if I had the unlimited money as well, I would also get some tutors probably at the end of the day to practice at my specific level, and probably use something like a direct methodology in order to teach me. Oh, I could talk about this for days, man, if I had the unlimited resources. Guys, get me to 1 million subs. I want to be on 1 million subs. That way I don't have to do anything else. I can just learn languages.
So he gave a long answer, but the first two things that he mentioned, where you have to use a frequency list of vocabulary as a guideline, and you have to do some extensive reading.
This is the one thing I hate about like language learning videos is people always say, you have to. No. With language learning, there is nothing that is a have to beyond you do something with the language every single day. What you do does not matter. I know I stress this all the time, but you don't have to do something. And here he's saying you have to use word frequency lists. No, you don't. But they are a good idea when you're at the beginning of the language. Pick up the most frequent words, maybe the first 1,000 if you can. Learn those, learn them in context so you can see how they interact with the other words around them. But beyond that, frequency lists are basically pointless because you're going to start diving into specific domains of content that you're interested in. And unless you have the most generic of interests, you're basically going to be, learning words if you're following a frequency list that are not really that relevant anymore. Like, I watch a ton of gaming videos. Words that are relevant to me is like, zombie and bullets and, guns and ammunition and stuff like that in Chinese. And that's definitely not going to appear in a frequency list, and it would probably get me banned if I made one.
From next week, you have no responsibilities anymore. Just your full-time job is going to be learning a language. Let's say it's...
Come on, guys, get me to 1 million subs. Just hit that sub thing. Help out old Evildea right now, and I'll learn whatever random language the community wants.
It's going to be something fairly hard, like Arabic. You have 1 year to reach, let's say, C1. So what would you do on a daily basis?
Oh, the first part of Arabic would be, which Arabic? Oh, no. I've actually thought about Arabic before. It'd be like, oh, okay, well, maybe I'd want to learn... Like, the logical choice would probably be, like, the Egyptian, Arabic. And I know there's, like, a big war that happens over people, and they'll be like, oh, there's only one unified Arabic, but... Guys, let's be a bit realistic right now, okay? I'd probably start with the Egyptian Arabic, just because it has, like, the most material for it, like, actual content online. But it's a hard one.
Basis, what resources would you use?
Well, I'd get hold of a frequency list of items in the language, and I'd make sure that was a rough guide to what I learned, because in English, the first 10 words covers 25% of every text. The first 50 words first 100 words covers about...
The only thing I hate about, like, this type of clarification, it's true, okay? So, yes, you're going to get, like, a massive amount of words. And this is the 80-20 rule, basically, at work. You're going to get the majority of the language. However, the problem is, at the end of the day, you're still going to have to learn, like, 99.9% of words. Because what will happen is you'll know every word except that one most important word in the sentence. You'll be like, nah, type of thing. So, yeah, they'll give you a boost. But at the end of the day, you still got to learn everything.
50% of the words in any text, so I'd be getting onto that.
Also, for me, frequency lists can be kind of boring. Like, I don't know about you guys. What do you guys think about, like, learning just frequency lists? Straight up frequency list. I've tried it a few times. Like, I've done them in context, and I do recommend it at the beginning. But I try to move away from them as fast as possible because they're just so goddamn boring.
And high frequency stuff as fast as I could, doing deliberate study of them and learning. There's clear cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, that's true. Like, if it's not boring for you, then you're going to make, like, massive, like, bounds within the language if you just go based on a frequency analysis.
In choosing
But it's so boring.
vocabulary in terms of its frequency and usefulness, so that learners get the best return for their learning. Because I had to learn to read, then I'd certainly be beginning early on picking that up, because I'd be wanting to get meaning-focused input through reading as quickly as possible. And
This is like one case where Chinese is like one of those annoying languages where everyone seems to forget about when they talk about reading and stuff. Because like obviously it's insane script, it just makes things so much more complex. But also with Chinese, it's like one of those things is if you focus on reading, that will massively help down the track, but it will suck at the start. And you're basically going to be hindering yourself for a very long time. But once you get past a certain point, then you're actually going to speed everything up, like massively, because the language that's spoken, like you'll hear all the sounds and they'll sound similar, you know, like repetitive sounds. But when you're learning these characters, you'll start seeing like lots and lots of words built out of these characters, and then your vocab will massively expand a lot quicker. However, to get to the number of characters you need in order for it to expand at that rate, you need a lot of characters. You need like 2,000 plus characters before it starts expanding like quite fast, and you'll be able to just start picking up words more in context.
I'd be looking around for material which is written more at my level.
And lastly, we also talked about,
All of that was fine, by the way.
so when people learn languages, it's often the case that even if you learn for a long time, even advanced language learners, they make mistakes in terms of pronunciation, but also in terms of the language structure, the grammar. And so how do
Someone has actually pointed this out, I think, in my Discord, or they might have done it in the comments, but basically this comes down to people reach a nice level and then they stop learning. And it's understandable why. And I actually saw, who was it? It was like, there's like that Chinese YouTuber, it's a white girl who also speaks Japanese. She made a great comment about this somewhere. I forget her name. Someone drop it in the comments. But basically she said, I could invest my time in improving, because she had like a lot of issues with certain tones and stuff. She said, I could invest my time in improving this for like a marginal tiny gain. Or I could put all my time over here and massively improve something else. So that's basically what happens there is people, they look at this as a time investment and they're like, yeah, I know I've got mistakes, but does it really matter? Really? And it comes down to, just what's more important to you.
How do you prevent this, and how do you learn a language in a way that you prevent making these mistakes?
You can't prevent it. Like, you can slowly nullify it down to a smaller and smaller fraction, but it will always be there. I've been at Esperanto now for 14 years. I actually know that because I started, no, actually longer, 15 years. I started it before I met my wife, and it was our anniversary just recently. But you'll never get to a point where you're perfect. It just comes out perfectly. You know why? Because natives don't even do that.
Down the line. And so he talked about the importance of really getting things right from the start, and how frequent vocabulary, I think, survival vocabulary actually facilitates this. And also the importance of being able to imitate the pronunciation of a native speaker with audio, for example.
One of the requirements of early learning and of most learning is that you should have the best chance of getting things right or getting things acceptable, let's put it that way. And I think that as early as possible you should
That's a better statement, getting it acceptable.
be trying to get things right. With something like the survival vocabulary for starting off, it's simply memorization of the sentences and then being able to use those sentences and so on. And you use them with a good pronunciation, and the best pronunciation you can do it at that stage, simply by imitation. And that's good. But it doesn't mean, when I say using a language, it doesn't necessarily mean that you just stumble along and, make tons of errors and do things like that.
The clips that you just watched are part of a 2-hour conversation I had with Paul Nation. And so I'm going to put the link to the 2-hour conversation I had with Paul Nation in the description of this video. And following my conversation with Paul Nation, I started building flashcards based on his advice for Anki. And so if you want to check out these flashcards for multiple languages.
Okay, so yeah, this has been a really good video. It backs up exactly what I've thought about language learning for a long time now. Obviously my ideas have evolved over time, but it basically backs up fully what I've been saying for a big part of like the last few years. The only downside is that I know the card system that he's talking about there. So like his Anki core, it needs some work from what I've read within the comments on the Discord. So if he does end up watching this video, just check over your card system, that you built here, your Anki core, because there's a lot of issues at the moment. So make sure like it's in a good state before you promote it too much. Otherwise, you're going to give yourself a bad rep. And I can see you've done like amazingly good content right here. I love this video, apart from that one thing. So this will definitely be going into, you know, the good language advice list. That's pretty much it. If you guys want me to review any other videos, drop a link to them in the description below. And I'll see you all in the next video. And make sure you sub so you can get me to 1 million subs, and then I can start learning languages for fun. And I know you guys are going to make me learn the most random languages. That's a promise. I will learn a language of the community if I ever get that big. And I know I'm not going to get that big, so mahaha!